On today's show, who are the Houston Rockets' most likely breakout candidates for this upcoming season? It's all coming up on today's Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet just $5, that's $5, and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for being an everydayer. On today's show, we're going to get into this discussion about who are the most likely breakout candidates for the Houston Rockets this upcoming season. We're going to weigh factors like their usage, roles, lineup factors, all sorts of different things to consider when looking at who's in the best position to have a breakout year or breakout years, possibly plural, for the Houston Rockets this upcoming season. And then also which player having a breakout season would be the best outcome for this Houston Rockets team. But before we tackle that, a little bit of housekeeping at the top. It was reported by The Athletic's Kelly Iko that the Houston Rockets will indeed be hosting their training camp at their new practice facility this upcoming season. Now, if you are an everydayer, if you listen to the show consistently, then you've been known that that was a possibility for the Rockets. It seems that they have solidified that decision. They will indeed be hosting their training camp there instead of at Lake Charles or, McNeese State University in Lake Charles or down in Galveston. I'm very excited. I cannot wait to see the new training facility. Touring it while it was still being, under construction, got the hard hat over there in the background, was a ton of fun. I can't wait to see the finished product. My only caveat is I hope it doesn't impact kind of the behind the scenes coverage that we get, because traditionally when media make the effort to travel to training camp when it's not located in Houston, you get a little bit kind of behind the scenes access, right? You get to watch some of the scrimmages, some of the drills taking place. And that's how I get that kind of behind the scenes footage that I'm able to then share with you guys on the YouTube channel, all that stuff. So I hope it doesn't take away from that angle of the coverage, but nonetheless, still very excited for it. Glad that the Rockets have seemingly officially made that decision. But let's go ahead and get into this conversation about breakout candidates for the Houston Rockets this upcoming season, because I think there are a lot of players on this roster who have the potential to have breakout years. And so I posed this question on social media, and I was actually really surprised by one of the answers, one of the players who got a lot of representation in the replies. I think conventional wisdom would lead you to point to a couple names kind of at the front of the pack, and then one of these was really surprising to me. So as far as the votes are considered, Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. led the way. They were tied for the most votes to potentially have breakout seasons for the Rockets this year. Those names make a lot of sense. We'll kind of unpack why for each of them in just a moment. The next name after them was Amen Thompson, which also one of the names that I thought made a ton of sense as a breakout candidate for the Houston Rockets. The fourth name on this list I was very shocked by, and that is Tari Eason, who earned a lot of votes with Rockets fans as a potential breakout candidate this upcoming year. I don't want to say I disagree with it. I'm a little surprised by it, and we'll kind of discuss it in just a moment. Alperen Sengun got some votes as well, and you might be thinking, well, Alperen Sengun just had a breakout season, but maybe if he levels up again, the question is how much more does he have to level up for it to be considered a quote-unquote breakout season when it already feels like he just had one. And then at the very bottom of the list, all by his lonesome, is Cam Whitmore, who recorded one vote for potentially being the Rockets' breakout candidate. So let's start with the conventional wisdom, the leading contender here, I think, the guy who I think is not only has the most pressure on him to have a breakout season, but is also in the best position to have a breakout season for the Rockets. And that's none other than Jaylen Green, right? Look, first off, this is a make or break year for Jaylen Green. And some Rockets fans might not like hearing that, but that's just the fact of the matter. Like, Jaylen's going into this year 4. He doesn't have a contract extension, unlike many of his peers from the 2021 draft class. Neither does Alperen Sengun, and it doesn't look like the Rockets have any intent to extend either of them ahead of the start of the season. So from a financial perspective, he is playing for his next contract the moment he steps foot on the court this season. So if he underperforms for any stretch of the season, if he struggles right out of the gate and is in, danger of potentially losing his starting spot or having his minutes reduced or being benched at the end of games like he was last season, all of those factors, all the things that he dealt with last season are going to be factors this year that play into his potential next NBA contract, whether it's with the Houston Rockets or another team entirely. So that's one major factor to consider. Now, looking at some of the positives here for Jaylen Green, because I don't even want to view the financial thing as like a negative. It's just there's a lot of outside pressure, right, for Jaylen Green to, it's essentially a prove-it year for Jaylen Green to earn his next contract. And that's kind of what the Rockets, I believe, are banking on and why they haven't tendered an extension yet to him. So not only is that a factor to consider, there's also the fact that on this Rockets roster, there is a ton of blossoming young talent. There are multiple guys who could be gunning for or should be gunning for Jaylen Green's starting spot if he underperforms at any point throughout this season. We know for a fact that Ime Udoka was hinting at potentially changing the starting lineup last season when things were looking really, really bad. And the elephant in the room at that point was Jaylen Green's play. Now, I will introduce the caveat that Jaylen Green had a lot of adjusting to do, and it was probably the toughest adjustment of any of the young core in Jaylen Green's role, adjusting to the expectations and Ime Udoka's system and a new coach and the competitiveness and everything, right? The benefit for Jaylen this year is he doesn't have to do that adjustment, right? Last year was the adjustment year. This year, the Rockets have they're basically bringing back the exact same roster with the additions of, well, you have a healthy Tari Eason now, and then you're introducing Steven Adams, who will be a major addition for guys like Jalen Green and Fred VanVleet. The screening presence that Steven Adams provides will be monumentally helpful for the guards on the perimeter. So that's one benefit. And so you're introducing Steven Adams, you're introducing Reed Shepherd, another great elite catch and shoot presence who will hopefully help the spacing and give Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun and Fred VanVleet, other guys, the playmakers on the roster, another guy to be able to facilitate to and also help take some of the pressure off of them at various points in the game. So Jaylen is going to have, I think, more opportunity than any of the other guys on this roster, except for maybe Alperen Sengun, from the standpoint of usage and his role and his expectations for this team to flourish. And when you think about all those factors and you pour them all into a pot together, I think that it makes a lot of sense that Jaylen is the most likely candidate to have a breakout season. Now, it's all dependent on Jaylen at the end of the day, right? Consistency has been the biggest issue for Jaylen Green throughout this point in his career. We know that the talent is there. We know that the highs are there. We saw an insane peak from Jaylen Green in the month of March last year. He was arguably one of the best players on the planet for an entire month last season. The real question is, can he maintain that consistency over the course of an entire 82-game season? Because if he struggles right out of the gate, if he has another rough start to his season and is struggling 10, 20, 30 games into the year, I would not be shocked to see Ime Udoka pull a very quick switch and inject somebody else into the starting lineup, or we could potentially see some benchings again, where Jaylen's maybe not a part of the closing lineup in certain situations at the end of games, just like what we saw last season. Last year was essentially the adjustment year, the developmental year, the year where you allowed mistakes and you were incredibly patient with all of the young players on the roster. This is the year where you take all the lessons and you take everything that you learned last season and you now apply it and you say, there are no more excuses. You either bring it or you don't have it. And that's why it feels like it's a make or break season for Jaylen Green, but it feels like he is also going to be in the best position to have a breakout season for a lot of the factors that we just illustrated. Coming up, want to get into a couple of the other breakout candidates for the Houston Rockets, what it would look like for Jabari Smith Jr., what it would look like for Amen Thompson, some of the factors to consider when we look at them possibly having breakout seasons, as well as which player breaking out helps this team the most. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Look, you've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little bit different for you today. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5, just $5, and you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. So head on over to FanDuel.com, take a look at some of the betting odds. You can go bet on who you think is going to make the NBA Finals, win the title, the NBA Cup, or you can go take a look at some of the season awards and navigate on over to Rookie of the Year, where finally Reed Shepherd is the favorite at plus 600. So go bet on Reed Shepherd plus 600 to win Rookie of the Year. And then you can do all that, and then you'll get yourself 3 weeks free of NFL Sunday Ticket. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, so I started this conversation off with Jalen Green. I feel like he's the candidate that makes the most sense to have a breakout year for the Rockets, kind of by necessity in a way, as illustrated in our first segment of the show. But let's talk about the next guy on this list that I think is also poised to potentially have a really big year for this Rockets team, and I'll give you a few reasons why, and that's Jabari Smith Jr. Now, first off, look, Jabari struggled his rookie year. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was a rough year. It was still in the Steven Silas era of Houston Rockets basketball. Please don't take me back to it. Like, I don't want to have to relive or think about that era of Rockets basketball. I try not to. But he came in, had a really rough rookie season, but he really stepped it up in a pretty massive way to go from the struggles that we saw in Jabari's rookie year to him playing a really important role on this Rockets team last season, being a serviceable big man for this Rockets team, being a versatile defender, picking up the three-point shooting, getting it up to 36.3% on decent volume from downtown. I mean, these were some really strong developments in Jabari Smith Jr.'s game. Now, he's still pretty far away from being a star caliber player in today's NBA, but he is trending in the right direction. And I do think when you start to take a look at Jabari's numbers from this past season, right, just under 14 points a game, 8 boards, again, 36% from 3, if he continues to trend up in all of those categories, I think there's a reasonable outcome where you look at Jabari and he's averaging somewhere around 17, 18 points a night, somewhere around 10 or 11 boards. Maybe you up the assist numbers a little bit more. And then if the three-point, that's going to be the big one for me, I think, is if the three-point percentage continues to creep up, if he can get it up to 37, 38, 39, hell, maybe 40%, right, and become kind of a dead-eye shooter, and especially upping the volume too would be really helpful for him as well, then I don't see how that isn't yet a breakout campaign for Jabari Smith Jr. That third year too, this is the year where we often point to players, especially lottery picks, high draft picks, whatever. That year 3 is, I don't know who decided year 3 was the year, but it feels like year 3 is often that kind of breakout year for a lot of young players. And so I feel like Jabari is poised to have yet another evolution, I guess, in his game, even if it's just him doing basically what he did last year, but just with better overall numbers, better counting, slightly higher counting stats, better percentages, what have you. He could literally do the exact same thing he did last year and just increase his numbers across the board. And I think you quantify it as a breakout season. Now, the argument against Jabari, and this is going to be what I'm so curious about this upcoming season, is how do the Rockets envision the best version of Jabari Smith Jr.? How much responsibility are they willing to give him offensively? How much of a role will he have in the offense, right? Will Jabari be afforded opportunities offensively to create his own shot, right? Will he get his touches at the elbow or with his back to the basket? Will Ime do things where maybe Jabari Smith Jr. is more of the focal point in the second unit, right? Maybe he gets the early substitute and gets away from the starters. Then he gets more offensive reps with the second unit, like at the top of the second quarter, at the end of the first quarter, things like that. How do you stagger this? Because there are so many mouths to feed on this Rockets team. And yes, there's a world where Jabari can still be a really elite player if all he is just a catch and shoot threat offensively. But I think the best version of Jabari Smith Jr. requires a team and a coach and an offensive scheme to kind of lean into some of his strengths a little bit more. That's what I've been begging the Rockets to do for 2 years now, right? We know that Jabari is like a mid-range assassin, and yet there are still a lot of times where it feels like the Rockets don't take advantage of a 7-footer who basically has an unblockable shot against 99% of the NBA, and they just don't let him get to his favorite spots enough. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's the analytics team saying, hey, we don't want Jabari taking those shots. We prefer him to sit at the 3-point line, yada, yada, yada. Who knows why? So that's one of the kind of underrated storylines that I'm going to be paying attention to this next season is, will Jabari have enough opportunity to have a breakout year? Now, I will say then on the other side of the ball, defensively, Jabari could take on more ownership on that side of the basketball. That is an area where we could see some growth from him. And if he's able to do that, right, because Jabari is going to be, kind of that backline defensive helping presence, because he plays the 4, because he's not usually responsible for taking the toughest assignment offensively. Now, yes, the Rockets do have a almost switch everything defense where they traditionally switch things 1 through 4, all those actions on the perimeter. So it's not like Jabari doesn't have moments where he's guarding, say LeBron or Kawhi or Paul George or whoever on the perimeter, right? He's guarding the top tier athletes out on the perimeter. He does spend a lot of time though as that backline defender. So him maybe taking on a little bit more of a leadership role defensively could be another way for him to elevate his game on the other side of the floor as well, not just offensively. So that could be a place where Jabari Smith Jr. kind of hangs his hat this upcoming season and has potentially breakout opportunities there as well. Now, the other name on this list, Amen Thompson. First off, Amen Thompson is a guy that absolutely makes the most of his minutes when he's on the basketball floor. He's so incredibly impactful. And we saw that throughout last season. We saw Amen Thompson be deployed in so many different ways. We saw him offensively playing out of the dunker spot. We saw him as a terror in transition. We saw him develop and grow and become basically the Rockets' best point of attack defender, and easily already now surpassing Dillon Brooks in one season is now the Rockets' best overall defender. Like, that's kind of crazy to think that a rookie has that level of impact already out of the gate. But that's what Amen Thompson has accomplished so far. So when you look at that, it stands to reason that year 2, Amen Thompson could level up even further. Now, there are certain limitations to Amen Thompson's game. So one of the major drawbacks here is Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. are starters. They are going to get, realistically, starter level minutes. Amen Thompson is not going to be afforded that many minutes right out of the gate. Amen Thompson is going to have a lot less to work with, assuming he gets, we'll say 20 minutes a night. We'll be generous with it, because even 20 minutes might be too much when you consider the fact that, Fred and Jaylen are going to be eating up 30 plus minutes a night at the guard spots. Let's say Dillon conservatively gets like 28 minutes a night. That leaves another 20 at the small forward spot. And let's say Jabari gets 30 minutes a night. That's 18 minutes at the power forward spot. So you have 38 minutes at the 3 and at the 4, but to share between Amen Thompson and Tari Eason, because that's where Amen Thompson played a majority of his minutes last season, was on the wing. And the Rockets still have other guards who need the other minutes that Fred VanVleet and Jalen Green aren't getting, namely Reed Sheppard and Cam Whitmore, and even potentially some spot minutes here and there, whatever, for Aaron Holiday. So you start to look at all of this, right? And you start to wonder where are the Rockets, where is Ime going to get these minutes for Amen Thompson? And it might just be as simple as Ime goes with whoever's playing the best that night, right? Maybe Jalen Green is struggling one night, so he gets less minutes. Or maybe Dillon Brooks is having a completely off night, so he gets, pulled in the first half and doesn't even see a single minute in the second half, or he gets very few minutes in the second half. He's not in the closing lineup, whatever. That's going to probably be how Ime has to juggle this and figure out, okay, who are my best 5 players to put on the court? Who are the best 5 that gives me the chance to win this game? And that'll probably be how he adjusts things throughout this upcoming season. But for Amen, he's going to continue to do what he did last year and be a defensive wrecking ball. But the real question for him and his ability to level up this season is, how much better did he get offensively? Because he does have some very legitimate limitations in his offensive game. The lack of a shot is very apparent. Now, we saw some highlight footage. We saw the Swish Cultures video, and he was knocking down some spot up threes. If Amen Thompson can even shoot, if he can go from what he shot this past season from 3-point land, which is a very painful 13.8%, realistically, if he can even get that number up to 25% this year, that is a monumental increase. Like, I'd be content with him getting it up to 25% this next season. But even outside of the outside shooting, I made the argument in a recent episode that I think the biggest development for Amen Thompson is going to be his handle. If he has a tighter handle going into the season, then he'll be able to do more in the realm of attacking the defense in the half court, breaking down guys in transition, and scoring at the rim, right? Getting to the interior where he can then score for himself, absorb contact, draw fouls, get to the free throw line, finish at the cup, what have you, and or create for his teammates. That, to me, is going to be the biggest barrier for Amen Thompson. And that'll be the thing that changes him from just being kind of a pseudo wing that has to play out of the dunker spot, which he did last year because he couldn't shoot the ball, into a more Ben Simmons, Russell Westbrook-esque threat that you can put the ball in his hands and let him run some offense, right? Put the ball in his hands, give him 4 shooters, and let him operate in transition and in the half court. That'll be the barrier for Amen Thompson to be able to have a breakout year this upcoming season. Coming up, I want to get to the last couple names on the list, the sleeper picks for breakout seasons, if you will, Tari Eason and Alperen Sengun, as well as which player having a breakout year is most beneficial for this Rockets team. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, the name that surprised me on this list the most was one Tari Eason. Look, and I don't want this to come off as like I'm not incredibly high on Tari. I am. I just think that I just don't know how high of a ceiling Tari Eason really has. Right? Like, realistically, if you crank up Tari's minutes, like do his numbers, or will they be commensurate with more minutes? Like, what if I look up Tari's like per 36 numbers? Like, this is going to be a fun little thought exercise. If I grab Tari's per 36 numbers from last season, we'll just use last season, even though he only played 22 games, we'll use last season. His per 36 numbers have him at 16 points, 11.5 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, 1.5 blocks. Those are pretty substantial numbers. I think Tari's going to suffer from a lot of the same situation that Amen Thompson is going to suffer from, in that where is Tari going to get these minutes from? I think that for Tari to eclipse even 22-ish minutes a night, they're going to have to come at the expense of guys like Dillon Brooks and Jabari Smith Jr. So in a way, for Tari Eason to be able to have a quote-unquote breakout year, I think it's going to require one of Dillon Brooks or Jabari Smith Jr.'s roles to be reduced, because Tari's just a guy that I don't think Tari's numbers are going to like drastically change based on the minutes that he's been getting. I mean, he basically had roughly the same role across both seasons, right? First season as a rookie, he averaged 21.5 minutes per game. Last year, in the brief amount of games that he played just under 22 minutes a game. And the thing is, the numbers are really eerily similar across both seasons. So I can see it where you make the argument, yeah, if you give Tari more minutes, his production is going to scale and it'll match, right? His per 36 numbers. Tari is probably one of the guys that is very true to his per 36 numbers. Like, if you gave Tari 36 minutes a night, I bet he actually gives you his exact per 36 numbers, because that's just who Tari Eason is as a player. But for what the Rockets are trying to achieve this next season, I don't think that Tari is going to get enough minutes flat out to be able to achieve that. And I do think that, unfortunately, if there's a world where Tari Eason is getting extra minutes or is getting 25, 30, 35 minutes a night, then I think it's because of some deficiencies elsewhere in the roster, right? Which is kind of a bad thing, right? It would mean that maybe Jabari Smith Jr. is struggling and hasn't leveled up the way that we thought he did in year 3, or maybe Dillon Brooks is starting to already decline, kind of like we saw at the end of last season, where Dillon Brooks started to regress a little bit over that final 1/3 of the season. If that's the same Dillon Brooks from the final 1/3 of last season, we get that version of Dillon Brooks at the start of this next season, then yeah, there's a world where Tari Eason should be gunning for that starting small forward spot and potentially eating up a lot of Dillon Brooks' minutes. But it's also not the best case scenario for the Rockets, because then you're going to have a starter who's, playing some underwhelming basketball, and then you got to figure out, okay, do you bench him? Do you trade him? Like, what do you do here? So I don't necessarily disagree with the idea of Tari Eason having a breakout season. I think Tari is just a guy that's going to produce no matter what role you give him. It's just going to be really tough for this Rockets team to find the minutes to allow the increased production, I guess, for Tari. And then the other name here, and this is the guy that already had a breakout season, so I guess, are we going 2 for 2 here? And that's Alperen Sengun. I mean, Alpi already put up a pretty monster year, just to double check and make sure I get his stats correct here. I should have had his page pulled up already, but averaged 21.1 points, 9.3 rebounds, and 5 assists this past year. His TS percentage, double check that really quick. Advanced stats, TS percentage, 58.5 true shooting. Like, the numbers were really solid for Alpi this past season, right? How much more can Alpi level up? And that's really the big question here, is because he already played at arguably an all-star level. We throw around the term all-star a lot. I think it's worth noting that when we say all-star, when I say all-star at least, I don't necessarily mean, oh, he made it to the all-star team. I'm just talking from a sheer production standpoint, right? 21, 9, and 5 is absolutely an all-star caliber player. He just didn't have the votes behind him to get it. Now, if the Rockets take off this season, if they have a really strong year, if they're one of the top 6, top 5 teams in the Western Conference, and if he has the winning record behind him as well as the counting stats, then I fully believe that Alperen Sengun could easily be an all-star this upcoming season. Is that considered a breakout year? If the counting stats are essentially the same, but if he gets the all-star nod, is it then a breakout season for Alperen Sengun? I kind of don't think it is, right? If he's doing basically the same level of production, and if all it is that the narrative has changed, then I don't really consider it a breakout season. But what I will say, and a few of the people pointed this out as far as just kind of the commentary on social media, is Alpi could realistically level up again. Like, there's a world where Sengun, especially in a more fast-paced Houston Rockets system, could average somewhere in that 23 to 25 points per game realm. The assist numbers could go up with more shooting and better spacing on the team. If Jaylen Green is, strong right out of the gate and Alpi has a really strong running mate, and they're able to, really tap back into their two-man game with one another, then I don't see why Alperen Sengun couldn't average something like 25, 10, and 7 this next season. And if he's averaging 25, 10, and 7, that's absolutely another gear past where he's already at. That's an all-NBA caliber player, potentially. So you look across the board at all these different candidates, and the Rockets do have a lot of guys that could be poised to have a breakout season this year. I think, though, when it gets down to it, the number one guy that benefits this team the most if he has a breakout season this year has to be Jalen Green. It has to be. I think if you're thinking long-term projection, then Amen Thompson would probably be the name. Like, if you could, I did this thought experiment a while back, I think, with Ali Khan on a show, but if you could pick any two of the Rockets' young core, which at the time it was the core 6, now it's the core 7. If you could pick any two of the Rockets' core to guarantee that they hit their 99th percentile outcomes, then I think it's a no-brainer you pick Amen Thompson. Absolutely no-brainer. But for this Rockets team to succeed this year, this season, and also for what it means long-term, so not only just the success in the here and now, but also for the long-term potential of this team, if Jaylen Green finally unlocks the best version of himself, if he is finally the consistent version of Jaylen Green, and if he can be, again, even 70% of what he was in the month of March on a consistent basis, then suddenly the Rockets then have two immediate all-star caliber talents in Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun, which either of them could then take that next step, right? Maybe Alpi continues to take another leap forward, whatever. One of them could potentially still become the best player on a championship contender. We don't know if Alpi is at that level yet. And we don't know if Jalen Green can reach that level yet. He hasn't reached the all-star level yet consistently. But if Jalen Green at least reaches a consistent all-star production level, good efficiency, he's got the counting stats, all that, and he's able to do it across a full 82-game season, I think that would guarantee that the Rockets are at least a top 6 seed in the Western Conference. Like, if Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun have similar levels of production from just the counting stats, the scoring, the playmaking, the rebounding, all that, And on top of that, if the efficiency is there, then I think the Rockets are easily a top 6 seed in the Western Conference. You have an all-star Jalen Green, an all-star Alperen Sengun, plus the rest of the Rockets supporting cast. We already saw an all-star level Alperen Sengun plus a struggling Jalen Green and a younger, less experienced Rockets team just racked up 41 wins. And they probably could have added like 2 or 3 more wins to that tally anyways. If Jalen Green's an all-star this next season, then I think the Rockets are easily looking at 46, 47, 48 wins for sure and competing for a guaranteed playoff spot, not even in the play-in discussion at that point. So that's why I think Jalen Green having a breakout year, Jalen Green taking the leap, we're not even going to call it the leap. We're going to call it the consistency leap. How's that? If Jalen Green can just be consistent, it'll take this Rockets team to the very next level. I'm curious your thoughts. Who do you think is going to be the player that breaks out on this Rockets roster this next season? Who do you think is the most important player to have a breakout season for this Houston Rockets team? Let me know in the YouTube comments. But as always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.